For this video, we will be discussing another useful feature in Microsoft Excel, and our topic for today is data validation. So, let's get started. First, what exactly is data validation? Data validation is a feature in Excel used to control and restrict the type of data or values that users can enter into a specific cell or range. In simpler terms, data validation allows us to set rules for what can and cannot be entered in a cell. This is especially useful when working with datasets because it helps make sure that the information we collect follows a certain format or set of rules. For example, if a cell is supposed to contain only the choices male or female, we can use data validation to limit the available entries to those options. Now let's talk about the main functions of data validation and why it is useful, especially when working with data. First, it restricts data entry. Data validation prevents human error by enforcing rules. This means we can set a rule that prevents users from entering values that are not allowed, helping us avoid mistakes in our dataset. Second, it standardizes inputs. Data validation provides users with a fixed set of options to choose from, eliminating typos and inconsistent spelling. For example, instead of having different entries such as Ilocos and Ilocos Sur, when we only want one standard option, we can provide a fixed list for users to choose from. And third, it improves user interface. Data validation can also display helpful guide pop-ups when a user clicks a cell or customize error alerts when invalid data is submitted. So aside from controlling the data, it can also help users understand what they are supposed to enter and notify them when their entry does not follow the rules. Now, there are actually many types of data validation available in Excel. But don't worry, we won't be discussing every single type today. For our lesson, we will focus only on the basic and commonly used types that are specifically useful when working with data analytics. These are lists, whole number, date, and text length. Let's briefly look at each one. The first option is list. List allows us to provide a fixed set of choices that users can select from. This helps eliminate typos and inconsistent spelling, which is important because consistent data allows Excel to properly group information when we create pivot tables and charts. For example, instead of asking someone to manually type the name of a department, we can simply provide a drop-down list containing the available departments. The second option is whole number. This allows us to restrict a cell so that only whole numbers can be entered, based on the rules that we set. This is useful for preventing impossible entries such as a negative count or partial quantities when the data should only contain whole numbers. For example, if we are recording the number of students in a class, entering 25.5 students would not make sense. The third option is date. This allows us to control what dates can be entered into a cell. It is useful for making sure that transactions or records are entered within the correct reporting or fiscal period, which is important when analyzing time-based data. For example, if we're analyzing sales for the month of August, we can set a rule that only allows dates within the required period. And finally, we have text length. This allows us to control the number of characters that can be entered into a cell. This can help guarantee standardized formatting for primary keys used in dataset joining and lookups. For example, if an ID should always contain exactly 6 letters, we can use text length to make sure that users do not enter IDs that are too short or too long. So these are the 4 basic types of data validation that we will be focusing on today. Now that we understand what data validation is, why we use it, and the different basic types that are available, let's see how we can actually use these features in Excel. For this demonstration, gagamit tayo ng Excel Online and we will work with a simple dataset. For demonstration purposes, our first step is to convert our raw data into an Excel table. So I will select the entire dataset, then I'll go to Insert, Table, then press OK. Once our raw data is converted into an Excel table, mas magiging organized ang ating dataset, and it will also be easier for us to work with the different columns and records. Now, remember that data validation can be applied either to an existing column or to a new column, depending on what we need in our dataset. For our first example, we will use the sex column. For this column, we only want two possible entries, male and female. Instead of allowing users to manually type these values, we can use data validation to create a drop-down list. First, I will select all the cells under the sex column. Note that hindi natin isasama yung header and yung total row kung meron. We only want to apply the data validation rule to the cells where the actual data will be entered. Once the cells are selected, punta tayo ngayon sa Data tab, then select Data Validation. In the Allow, piliin natin yung list, and then, sa source, ilagay natin yung mga option. Male, female. Then, click Apply. Mapapansin nyo ngayon dito, meron na tayong drop-down, no? Male, female. So, for example, ang ilalagay ko dito ay magdadagdag ako ng male. Automatically, pwede. Pero kung idadagdag ko ay transgender, ayaw niya. Okay? Kasi, ang dapat lang na pagpipilian is male or female. This helps us maintain consistent data because everyone will be selecting from the same set of options. Now, let's move on to the second type, which is whole number. For this example, we will create a new column for age. Since age is normally represented using whole numbers, we don't want users entering values such as 20.5 or negative values such as negative 5. So this is where whole number data validation becomes useful. Again, select natin lahat except the header and the total kung meron. Go to Data, Data Validation, then iselect natin sa Allow ang whole number. Now, pwede natin dito piliin between, not between, equals, not equals, greater than, less than. So, ang gusto ko, for example, ay greater than. Since lahat naman sila ay greater than 40, so ilalagay ko ang greater than 40. So, for example, si Bongbong Marcos, ilagay natin ang taon niya. Hindi ko lamang taon niya, pero sabihin na lang natin 65. Okay, pwede. Now, kung si Sara Duterte naman, ilalagay natin 35. Hindi pwede. Sasabihin niya na invalid kasi nga it is less than 40. Okay, so palitan natin. Let's say 45 lang siya. Ayan, pwede na. So that is how whole number data validation works. This helps prevent impossible or inappropriate entries from being added to our dataset. Now, let's take a look at date option. For this example, we will use the transaction date. Gusto natin 2026 lang ang transaction date. Hindi pwede ang ibang years. So, select natin yung transaction date, go to Data, Data Validation, piliin natin ang date. So, sa start date, ilagay natin January 1, 2026. At sa end date, ilagay natin ang December 31, 2026. Then, apply. So, for example, maglalagay ako ng date na January 1, 2027. So, ayaw niya kasi invalid yung ating data entry. So, for example, ang ilalagay ko 10/13/2026. Pwede. Kasi nga, within 2026 siya. This is useful in data analytics because it helps make sure that the records you're analyzing belong to the correct reporting period. And finally, let's look at the fourth type, which is text length. For this example, magdadagdag ako ng column na contact number. Alam natin na ang contact number dapat ay 10 numbers lang siya, except yung 0. We want to make sure that the entries follow a consistent length. We can set a minimum and maximum number of characters that can be entered, or kung gusto mong exact yung ilalagay nila. So again, piliin natin yung mga cells, go to data, data validation, piliin natin ang text length. Then, since equal ang gusto natin, equals 10. Then apply. So for example, ang number niya ay 930-789-4669. Okay, pasok. Next, try naman natin maglagay ng sobra. 912-345-678-9-0. Ayaw niya. Kasi dapat, ang text length natin is 10. This helps us maintain standardized data, which is especially important when working with identifiers, lookups, and other datasets where consistency matters. And there we have it. We've now demonstrated the 4 basic types of data validation that we discussed. As you can see, data validation is more than just a way to restrict what users can type into a cell. It helps us prevent errors, standardize our data, and maintain the quality of our dataset. And this is especially important in data analytics because the quality of our analysis depends heavily on the quality and consistency of the data that we are working with. So that's it for our demonstration of data validation in Excel.